Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, September 25th, 2018. Where would you like to start today? How about Kavanaugh? I guess we're going to have to be spending another day on Kavanaugh. He continues to make problems for himself, light himself on fire, I guess. Yesterday, sitting down for an interview with, you'll never believe it, Fox News. And I did see somebody keenly observing the other day that, how interesting it is. Well, a guy credibly accused of sexual harassment who will sit down with Fox News for an interview, but not the FBI or any other investigators. Sounds familiar. And it does. And the person about whom you're thinking, of course, is rage tweeting again. And I don't know whether these are from this morning or from the afternoon, but he's increasingly unable to keep himself out of the Twitter sphere in complaining about this. Here's that tweet I was thinking of. Mimi Roca, former federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, and now a criminal justice fellow at Pace Law School and an analyst with NBC News and MSNBC, came up with that clever formulation. A man who claims to be falsely accused who will sit for a Fox interview but not an FBI interview. And, by the way, gold star for uncucumbered Gene Esselink, who says about a related issue in the news, it's expected Cosby will be sentenced to a seat on Supreme Court. That's an entirely likely outcome at this point. Man, it's another crazy day, like we said. So Kavanaugh sat down for this Fox interview, and if you're on one side, the interview went swimmingly, and the other side says it actually was a disaster, and did more to validate the fact that there will be another frog moving into my throat just in time for the beginning of the show. Did more to validate the claims against him than anything else. And I don't know, I think I'm beginning to agree with that assessment. Okay, I agreed with that assessment last night. It was easy to spot. Here's the front page story at the moment over at Daily Kos. Happens to be about Kavanaugh. Who would have guessed? It's Laura Clausen's entry. This time, Kavanaugh told Fox News he wants a fair process, but refused to call for an FBI investigation. I've seen others characterizing this exchange as between Brett Kavanaugh, his wife Ashley, I think is her name, sitting beside him, doing the Republican wife stands by accused Republican husband thing, and both being interviewed by, some nameless person at Fox News, another one of their regulars. And by the way, as I recall, did see others describing this woman who conducted the interview as one of the people who insisted that Roger Ailes was fantastic and there was nothing wrong with that guy while she was over at, while he was alive and she was at Fox News. And gee whiz, about a couple days later, after her insisting that the whole Gretchen Carlson situation was likely made up, the company ended up paying her several $1 million to settle her claims, but whatever. And so now she's handling this interview. And man, it was not great, really, honestly, for him. Traveling down the wrong path right off the bat and denying everything and insisting, not only denying that there was any untoward behavior, if you want to put it that way, between himself and Christine Blasey Ford, but also that any of these things had happened, and that the insinuation that he was something less than a very serious and very devout student during his time at this elite prep school, Catholic prep school, if you're wondering about the devout part. And, he's spending far too much time on his studies and other academic and athletic pursuits to be engaged in the underage drinking of alcohol. Of course, we do have the problem of the contemporaneous confession of the opposite, written in his own hand, as it were. It's printed, of course, but written by himself. These are what people get to do with their yearbook entries. You write it the way you want it. They'll just print it. And, of course, it's full of drinking references and what people think are sexual references as well, although that's not nearly as clear as declaring yourself treasurer of the Key City or the Keg City Club and the 100 Kegs or Bust proclamation. And I mean, unless there's some other secret meaning to being a member of the Beach Week Ralph Club, other than vomiting from excessive drinking, well then, I don't know. I have yet to figure out what it is. But that's not tops on the list. There's another incident that is tops on the list. But let's just pause for a moment to say good morning to all our regulars and pick up on notes that people are sending us. Bill in Portland, Maine lets us know that Daily Coast Radio is live now. Here's the theory on what's coming up on the show. Let's find out. Kagro X reports that the honorary role of crazy Colonel Gaddafi at the United Nations General Assembly will be played today by Cadet Bone Spurs Trump. Yes, I had almost forgotten about that. And, yeah, I guess today's the day, eh? All right, we'll check out about that one. And Mighty OCD, once again, rolling out the Krispy Kreme hot sign for us on this one. Good to have you with us live this morning. I know sometimes you can't listen in, but you do a great job promoting the podcast as well. Thank you both for your comments. Let's see. Oh, we'll put this one aside for later. A good call on a completely different topic. But let's go over to Pocket. And we'll talk about one of the top topics of discussion today, a New York Times story. This despite the fact that the New York Times had a little ding put in its credibility yesterday with another, I guess, of the top stories of the day, except I don't know how to report that one because I don't know what the facts are. Nobody does. And we only know that the New York Times appears to have been lost in the shuffle in all of this. Anyway, what I'm talking about here is the New York Times piece by Kate Kelly and David Enrich. Kavanaugh's yearbook page is horrible, hurtful to a woman it named. And this is, I guess, digging into another part of the comments that Kavanaugh and others buried in their personal pages in the yearbook. One of the ones that wasn't immediately apparent what they were talking about, and now they've figured it out. And it unearths an even more amazing story along the way. Let's take a look at this one. Brett Kavanaugh's page in his high school yearbook offers a glimpse of the teenage years of the man who is now President Trump's Supreme Court nominee. Lots of football, plenty of drinking, which again, he's now denying, which is amazing. Parties at the beach. Among the reminiscences about sports and booze is a mysterious entry. And I don't know how to pronounce this name, but I guess it's hinted at later in the story. I kind of skimmed through this thing. Renate, Renate, which I've heard of. Well, that's what it looks like. It says Renate, and then it says alumnius, which is just, I don't know, I guess that's 17-year-old elite Catholic prep school Latin for alumnus or alumni. He couldn't decide which one it was, so he just put alumnius. And that one had me puzzled. Less so than, say, Beach Week Ralph Club and 100 Kegs or Bust. Some other more cryptic references in there, but no one was really sure exactly what that meant because it wasn't obvious right off the bat, I guess. The word renate, Renate, appears at least 14 times, it turns out, in Georgetown preparatory schools, Georgetown Prep's 1983 yearbook. That's, of course, the one with Kavanaugh and his friends in it. Mike Judge is in there. The other guy who looks just like, apparently, Brett Kavanaugh, or Bart O'Kavanaugh. What's his name? Chris Garrett. He's in there, too. Anyway, it turns out it's a person, not a school or any sort of event or anything else that you might be an alumnus of. This is, the word appears on individuals' pages and in a group photo of 9 football players, including Kavanaugh. who were described as the Renate alumni in the caption for that photo of the 9 football players. It is a reference, as it turns out, to Renate Schroeder, then a student at a nearby Catholic girls' school, and I believe that would have been always forget the first name of it, Holton Arms School, is that right? But that's the school where Christine Blasey Ford attended. Yeah, Holton Arms School. But I'm not positive that's where Renate went to. I had not heard of the name either, Renate. I've run into a Renata in the past, and I would have recognized that. But I guess then I would have thought this was Renate. But again, there's another reference somewhere down lower in the story that explains I don't know whether it's the correct pronunciation or not, but the preferred pronunciation among these 9 football players. Anyway, it's a reference to Renate Schroeder, then a student at a nearby Catholic girls' school, and that can't be good. 2 of Judge Kavanaugh's classmates say the mentions of Renate were part of the football players' unsubstantiated boasting about their conquests. And that does make a certain amount of sense now that you start to think about it. Renate alumni, what's that supposed to mean? Oh, I get it. Now that you find out it's a person, it's a student at a nearby Catholic girls' school, you begin to get the picture of how uncomfortable that must have been. But just wait, I guess. They were very disrespectful, at least verbally, with Renate, said Sean Hagan, a Georgetown prep student at the time, referring to Kavanaugh, and they keep referring to him in this New York Times tweet. He says, Judge Kavanaugh, and I'm going to stop doing that, because I don't know whether that's going to be effective for very long. Referring to Kavanaugh and his teammates, I can't express how disgusted I am with them then and now. Well, I wonder how Renate feels about it. But guess what? They talked to Renate. And we find out. Kavanaugh's years at Georgetown Prep in a Maryland suburb of Washington are under intense scrutiny because of allegations by Christine Blasey Ford that he sexually assaulted her during high school. Judge Kavanaugh has denied the allegation. Oops, I didn't mean to call him that, but okay. He and Dr. Blasey are scheduled to testify Thursday before the Senate Judiciary Committee. And again, blah, 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 Kavanaughs, they love doing this whole time. They don't ever refer to him as Brett Kavanaugh or Mr. Kavanaugh. I guess that's, the Times' thing. They would otherwise be calling him Mr. Kavanaugh, but he's a judge currently, so they keep calling him that. Kavanaugh's peers have given different accounts of what he was like, but his yearbook provides a contemporaneous glimpse, everyone loves the word contemporaneous, of the elite Catholic school's hard-drinking atmosphere. Kavanaugh's personal page boasts 100 kegs or bust, and a culture that some describe as disrespectful to women. This month, Renate Schroeder Dolphin, that's her current last name, I guess, Dolphin. That one stood out to me when I was looking at the list of names and signatories to the letter, as a matter of fact, because, 1, the name is Dolphin, and 2, as it points out, I stepped on the line here. This month, Renate Schroeder Dolphin joined 64 other women who, saying they knew Judge Kavanaugh, quote-unquote Judge Kavanaugh, during their high school years, signed a letter to the leaders of the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is weighing Kavanaugh's nomination. The letter stated that, quote, he has behaved honorably and treated women with respect. Now, I think that they meant to say that he always had, but I mean, this is not, we weren't supposed to insinuate from this that one time he behaved honorably and treated women with respect, and the rest of the times he didn't, but that appears to be about correct. But yes, and by the way, having reread the letter, I am not sure that, I didn't count up all the names, but it seemed to me like some of the names I was reading yesterday didn't appear to be the names of women at all, but who knows, maybe I'm misreading it, or maybe there are 65 women and 1 or 2 other men, and so rather than saying 65 women and 2 men, they just said 65 women, and that could still be true. But yeah, her name jumped out at me because Dolphin, it's just like it sounds, it's not a weird spelling of dolphin or anything. So when Ms. Dolphin signed the September 14th letter, and that's all of, 11 days ago, she wasn't aware of the Renate yearbook references on the pages of Kavanaugh and his football teammates. How do you like that? In other words, she didn't say anything about it for 35 plus years, but only now at the 11th hour does she discover that she was the subject of something somewhere between a cruel joke and outright sexual harassment 35 years ago. Too late, though. You already signed the letter of support saying he was a great guy and he treated women with respect and treated them honorably, behaved honorably. But now she says, I learned about these yearbook pages only a few days ago. Less than 11, I guess. Ms. Dolphin said in a statement to the New York Times, I don't know what Renate alumnus actually means. I can't begin to comprehend what goes through the minds of 17-year-old boys who write such things, but the insinuation is horrible, hurtful, and simply untrue. I pray their daughters are never treated this way. I will have no further comment. Yeah, she wants to get out of this situation, and I can't blame her. Alexandra Walsh, a lawyer for Kavanaugh, said in a statement, Judge Kavanaugh was friends with Renate Dolphin in high school. He admired her very much then and admires her to this day. Admire? I don't think so. Kavanaugh and Ms. Dolphin attended one high school event together and shared a brief kiss goodnight following that event. The statement continued. They had no other such encounter. The language from Judge Kavanaugh's high school yearbook refers to the fact that he and Ms. Dolphin attended that one high school event together and nothing else. I'm sure, because that's the way football players speak with one another. We shared a brief goodnight kiss, everybody. Yeah, I'm believing that. Ms. Dolphin, though, said she never kissed Judge Kavanaugh. I think Brett must have me confused with someone else because I never kissed him, she said through her lawyer. And, of course, we all know exactly what happened. She kissed Chris Garrett. And the thought of that appeared in Bart O'Kavanaugh's head, and he was confused. They had a little inception game going because they're doppelgangers. I mean, come on. What is this even supposed to mean? I don't know. In an interview on Fox News on Monday, Kavanaugh defended his high school behavior in general terms. People might have had too many beers on occasion. And people generally in high school, I think all of us have probably done things we look back on in high school and regret or cringe a bit, he said. A White House spokesman, Raj Shah, declined to comment beyond the statement from Kavanaugh's lawyer. 4 of the men who were pictured with Kavanaugh in a photo captioned Renate alumni said it was simply a reference to their dating or going to dances with Ms. Dolphin. Sure. An elite Catholic boys' high school founded in 1789, Georgetown Prep has many alumni who have gone on to public service. Justice Neil M. Gorsuch of the Supreme Court is a graduate, as is Jerome H. Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve. Kavanaugh, a member of the football team and captain of the basketball team, played a prominent role in Georgetown Prep's firmament in the early 1980s. The school's culture was one of heavy drinking and at times insensitivity. And now it's illustrated with that photo of the 9 football players listed here as Renate alumni. Though missing from the photo, it says, is the president, I guess, J.C. Del Real. I don't know whether that's another classmate or just some other crazy joke or what. The caption from the New York Times points out which one is Kavanaugh, and apparently later in the article, Mike Judge is identified as the guy next to him here in this photo, in case you were interested in that. The 1983 yearbook, for example, includes multiple apparent references to the Ku Klux Klan, but not on Kavanaugh's page. We're talking here about there being a culture of heavy drinking and at times insensitivity. How you end up allowing the printed references to the Klan, I don't know, but hey. By the way, the Klan loves Catholics. Just thought I'd point that one out to you kids. His page, in addition to Kavanaugh's page, in addition to the alumnius entry, mentions his role as treasurer, quote-unquote treasurer of the Keg City Club. Now, what did he tell Fox News on Monday? The vast majority of the time I spent in high school was studying or focused on sports and being a good friend to the boys and girls that I was friends with. Some of Kavanaugh's high school peers said there was a widespread culture at the time of objectifying women. People claiming that they had sex with other people was not terribly unusual, and it was not terribly believable. said William Fishburne, who was in Kavanaugh's graduating class and was manager for the football team. Not just Brett Kavanaugh and his particular group, but all the classmates in general. People would claim things they hadn't done to sort of seem bigger than they were, older than they were. Most kids limited it, I think, to the Canadian girlfriend story, but for some reason, Judge Kavanaugh decided to go a bit further. Bill Barbeau, or Barbot, depending on how he pronounces it, who was a freshman at Georgetown Prep when Kavanaugh was a senior, said Kavanaugh and his clique were part of the school's fratty culture. There was a lot of talk and presumably a lot of action about sexual conquests with girls. He said Ms. Dolphin was a subject of that braggadocio. According to Mr. Hagan and another classmate who remained anonymous because he fears retribution. They said Kavanaugh and his friends were seeking to memorialize their supposed conquests with the Renate yearbook references. She should be offended, Mr. Hagan said of Ms. Dolphin. I was completely astounded when I saw she signed that letter on Kavanaugh's behalf. And that's really the big issue here. I mean, to me, she must be, she is. She's clearly regretting doing that. And I guess, well, maybe that just, I don't know if there's any better way of illustrating the foolishness, the recklessness, the reckless partisanship on the part of Republicans insisting that they need to accelerate the process. You're finding out that people who said 11 days ago that they were willing to sign on to a spontaneous public letter in support of Kavanaugh after the accusations of sexual assault had been made, they're still signing on to this thing. And in the space of 11 days, they've changed their minds. And why did they change their minds? Because they found out today, 35 plus years later, that they were the subject of a sexual harassment campaign in print by Kavanaugh and some 9 plus of his friends. But, he behaved honorably and always respectfully toward women, except that one time when he coordinated a sexual harassment attack against me with a group of 10 friends. Mind you, that Kavanaugh spent almost the entirety of his Fox News interview decrying how horrific, how awful, how outrageous and insensitive and despicable it is for someone like, let's say, Christine Blasey Ford, in his opinion, for someone to come up with, to promulgate false accusations of a sexual encounter in order to ruin that person's reputation. It's outrageous that somebody would come up with this idea, that someone would simply falsify, fake up a story of a sexual encounter just to ruin another person's reputation, says the guy who, in print, in front of all of us now, falsified the story of a sexual encounter in order to ruin someone else's reputation. Here's the big thing with this one. It seems to me that this story makes it absolutely impossible for Kavanaugh to credibly offer any defense other than, hey, I really didn't get it until I was much older how horrible I was to the young women in my life when I was in high school and maybe college, as it turns out. I've grown since then, and I've come to understand that I didn't get it as a kid. And I didn't get that I didn't get it until really just about now. But confronted with this now, I'm terribly sorry for what I did, and I can see exactly what the problem was, and I see why people are angry about it. I still don't feel, because I experienced this all in my head, I still don't feel yet like I was a bad kid, although, and I had many redeeming qualities, and everybody likes to think of themselves as a good person, but I clearly did some things that I shouldn't have, and that were damaging and bad, and had perhaps lasting implications, lasting repercussions for other people, chiefly women, those who I did offend and do harm to, who knew it at the time, have been living with this for many, many years. Whereas I have set it aside and forgotten it because I didn't think I was so bad. And I had forgotten about the Renate alumni thing, and thankfully Renate had not seen it until now too, because at least she was spared the decades of anguish from it. But I guess that would be a pretty horrible thing to discover right about now, particularly after coming out in support of me as a respectful person and who behaved honorably. I hate to have shattered that image, but I am very, very sorry about that. That's really the only plausible defense available to him at this point. So, of course, he's going with the other one, which is, I didn't do it. It's all a lie. They're all against me. They're all against me. It's a coordinated effort to take me down. The woman whose name I can't remember now, because she's too new on the scene for me to have committed it to memory. Who is it? Diane? It starts with a D, right? And it's Ramirez, the woman who was a classmate at Yale, who made the accusations that we just learned about yesterday. That Kavanaugh accuses her of coordinating with Christine Blasey Ford to bring these charges, which is an amazing thing to do, particularly since we've just now found out that he engaged not only in sexual harassment way back when, in addition to the sexual assault, but in a coordinated effort to sexually harass this poor girl, Renate Schroeder Dolphin. My goodness. I mean, I don't really understand how he thinks he can get away with this at this point, but I guess he's just another one of these gimme-tarians and figures he can get away with anything. So yeah, Mr. Hagen and this other person say she should be offended. I was completely astounded when I saw she signed that letter. And guess what? When we come back, we'll finish this article and discuss some other things that happened, including other signatories to the same letter who are now backing away from this. This is an amazing thing. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We've got more to read about this. Lots of comments coming in, including, yes, I understand. Again, I'll have to say, and you all know very well how much I dislike not knowing the correct pronunciation of a name or a place or any word or anything. I hate not knowing stuff. But it was my initial thinking was, this can't be Renate. But again, there's information in the article that leads you, I think, inexorably to that conclusion, or to the conclusion that these kids didn't know how to pronounce it and maybe, therefore, didn't know her at all. And, well, that seemed like a pretty interesting thing to note. We'll, like I said, we'll get to it in the article. But yes, people saying, yeah, Renate, Renate, is actually German. As the last name Schroeder probably would imply, and that it would be Renata, and I agree. But let's see. So aside from that comment, we have this one. Oh yes, and also I'm corrected. I guess I slipped and said that his friend, by the last name of Judge Kavanaugh's friend, not Judge Kavanaugh, but his friend Mark Judge. I might have said Mike Judge. Mike Judge is the famous guy who's the cartoonist. And probably is annoyed, and probably lots of people are making that mistake. I don't know. Maybe they aren't. Maybe I'm the only one. But yes, it was Mark Judge. That's correct. And Karen enjoying the last name of Dolphin. That's good. Hello, Ms. Dolphin. What's your porpoise for calling? Very cute. Another correction. Yes, Renate, Renate is the German spelling of Renata, pronounced the same way. So, let's see. Well, there's all sorts of comments about how it might be pronounced. Here's the thing. We'll get to the rest of this article, and you'll see why I've insisted on going with Renate, even though it's probably not right. Okay, so let's see. There was Hagen saying of Ms. Dolphin that she should be offended and that he was completely astounded when I saw she signed the letter. Now she's completely astounded that she signed the letter too. That's the problem. Some women who knew Kavanaugh at the time defended his conduct. These guys weren't any different than any other high school boys across the country, said Suzanne Matan, or Matan, I'm not sure, Matan, a friend of Kavanaugh's from their high school days, which is what Renate thought she was too. And I chose to hang out with those boys, and many other girls did too, because they were fun and they were safe and they were respectful, except they weren't. The Georgetown Prep yearbook's personal pages, by the way, were designed and written by the individual students, according to alumni. A faculty advisor reviewed the pages, and I'm not surprised that they were able to slip some of those references by him without his noticing. Probably a few others that he did notice and didn't care to stop. How you missed KKK references, I guess, depends on how they were formulated, but that seems pretty interesting. And why allow all the drinking references? Hey, I don't know. It was just a product of its time. Kavanaugh was one of 13 graduating seniors who referred to Ms. Dolphin in some way on their personal pages. How interesting. How many students graduate in a year from Georgetown Prep? I'd be curious to know. Some gave themselves titles. Delancey Davis, for example, listed himself as chairman of the board, B-O-R-E-D, of the Renate Club. We all know it's Renata, yes. Another football player, Tom Kane, not the former governor of New Jersey, no, nor his politician son, but K-A-N-E. Tom Kane mentioned on his page, Renata, should we even bother saying Renate anymore? Renata's Suicide Squad, and I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but it's weird that they're all referring to her. Don't you think? The group photo with Kavanaugh and 8 fellow football players in pads and uniform grinning was captioned Renata Alumni. Mark Judge, the commentator and author who has written about his alcohol-fueled years at Georgetown Prep, stands next to Kavanaugh in the photo. Barbara Van Gelder, a lawyer for Judge, declined to comment. 4 of the players in this photo, Mr. Davis, Kane, Tim Gaudet, and Don Ergo Jr., said in a statement that they had, quote, never bragged about sexual contact or anything like that with Ms. Dolphin. The statement, issued by Jim McCarthy, a public relations representative, said the yearbook's Renate references were intended to allude to innocent dates or dance partners and were generally known within the community of people involved for over 35 years, except they weren't known to the people involved who had the name that they were using in all of these things, so I don't know how generally known it really was. And of course, nobody believes it was about dance partners. These comments, the statement continued, were never controversial and did not impact ongoing relationships until the Times twisted and forced an untrue narrative. This shabby journalism is causing egregious harm to all involved, particularly our friend, and is simply beneath contempt. Nobody likes the New York Times today. Michael Walsh, another Georgetown Prep alumnus, also listed himself on his personal yearbook page as a Renate alumnus. And here, finally, the end of all the mystery. Alongside some song lyrics, he included a short poem. And here we go. It's not a worrisome or triggering poem. I mean, I wouldn't worry about that. It's the at the root of the mispronunciation of Renata. The poem reads, "You need a date, and it's getting late, so don't hesitate." And if you're all to be believed, the final line of the poem is, "to call Renata. That's the poem. You need a date, and it's getting late, so don't hesitate to call Renata. I think he thinks it's Renate, which might possibly just, if we're going to do some wild speculation here, might possibly mean they really didn't have any relationship at all with her, including even really any sort of close friendship, because they didn't even know how to pronounce her name. And I don't know whether that's supposed to be exculpatory or not, but it doesn't really help in terms of getting them out of accusations of some really pretty low-bred sexual harassment and a coordinated campaign of it at that. They clearly thought her name was pronounced Renate. Otherwise, the poem doesn't make a great deal of sense, unless that's an inside joke, which is possible. I guess that's another thing. That's not particularly exculpatory in any way, but I suppose the joke may be, everyone knows that her name is spelled in English, Renate, but that the pronunciation is Renata, and it irritates her when people say Renate, so this is funny. I guess that's the only explanation I can think of, but it seems to me like that's what they thought her name was. Mr. Walsh, continuing with the article, a bank executive in Virginia, was one of scores of Georgetown Prep alumni who signed a letter to Senate Judiciary Committee leaders vouching for Judge Kavanaugh's sharp intellectual ability, affable nature, and practical and fair approach devoid of partisan purpose. He did not respond to requests for comment. And by the way, how would a bank executive in Virginia have is that whose opinion you would want with respect to whether or not Kavanaugh's professional approach as a judge is practical and fair and devoid of partisan purpose? Have you been reading his decisions all along because you're a big Kavanaugh fan? I don't know. But okay. Letters like this frequently say more than their signatories mean for them to say. Ms. Dolphin was aware that members of Kavanaugh's clique were reciting that poem. According to a person familiar with her thinking, she told the football players that she found it offensive, believing it made her seem like a cheap date. And she asked them to stop, and that's the kind word for it. Cheap date, I guess. There are two words, of course. But, so she's familiar with it, presumably contemporaneously, because if she told the football players that she found it offensive, and they were still football players, that would have been right then, at that time. So she was aware of the poem, and aware that they were mispronouncing her name, presumably, as well. Although you'd think there'd be a note in there if there was an inside joke about that, too. Some of Kavanaugh's peers said they doubted that the yearbook notations were good-natured. Those guys, and remember, we're talking again about the football team at the local elite prep school. Those guys weren't big on crushes, Mr. Fishburne said. I think they felt that if a girl didn't want to date them, then they must be gay. I'm serious. Well, that was not an uncommon thing to say among braggartly boys at the time, I am sure, particularly these guys. A high school friend of Ms. Dolphin's, who also signed the letter to the Senate Judiciary Committee, said that while she stood by the letter's contents, as a friend of Ms. Dolphin, she was sickened by the yearbook's Renate references. She and a second friend of Ms. Dolphin's denied that there was any sexual contact between Ms. Dolphin and Kavanaugh or anyone else in his circle. But they all said it anyway, which, if you take her word for it, and I don't see why you wouldn't, only means that, like we said, 10 football-playing boys at the local elite prep school got together and decided they would all put in their yearbook, their legacy to one another forever after. They were going to use that space, that platform, to sexually harass this poor young woman. And she's only found out about it 35 years later. And after she then put her, stuck her neck out to support Kavanaugh. And guess what? Now she doesn't feel so good about it. And like I said, she's not even the only one. I found the whole thing pretty amazing. Not to mention the fact that they didn't know how to pronounce her name, which was also a little bit annoying and embarrassing for them, perhaps. Annoying for the rest of us, embarrassing for them. Although I guess it ended up being embarrassing for me as well. All right, let's see. I think I have to go to my Twitter feed to see if I can find more about this one, because I don't know if I got all of those things entered into Pocket in order to refer to them later on. But there was at least, let's see. Oh, look at this. Now people who are sending around pictures of Kavanaugh's yearbook page are, I think wisely, blurring out the addresses of their childhood homes. Though I think they've been long vacated, those homes, but now the poor people who live, well, they're not poor people, but the poor folks who live in those homes now are probably getting harassed left and right, or having people drive by their houses and take pictures or whatnot. All right. Yes. There was the tweet that I picked up on here from the account known as Riot Women with 2 N's, who, always making pithy observations, added this one, and it caught my eye. She puts it this way: I can't keep up with the names of women running away from the Kavanaugh letter of support signed by 65 women. Interesting. Which other ones are we talking about? Well, there's mention here. $1.5 million was spent at some point on an ad with Kavanaugh's classmate Louisa Gary, Garry. And there's a screenshot of the ad here. And I don't even know. I didn't see this ad, but I can imagine pretty generic television ad identifying one woman who has known him for many years, since the high school days, and saying what a wonderful person he was and how he behaved so honorably, etc., etc. Well, she now wants her name removed from the letter, as does Renata Dolphin. There's another name here, Dino, which is not typically a woman's name, but again, who knows? Dino Ewing is done too. Was that name on the letter? I remember that that wasn't the name that I thought was a man's name among the first 3 or 4 that I read the other day, but this is the word that goes along with this tweet here. There's the screenshot of Louisa Gary, I guess, appearing in the ad, and then this update, I guess, to the New Yorker story that we were talking about yesterday. This story was updated with comments from 2 former classmates of Kavanaugh's, Louisa Gary and Dino Ewing, who initially signed a statement of support for Kavanaugh provided by his attorneys. They approached the New Yorker after the story was published and asked that their names be removed from the statement, saying they did not wish to dispute Ramirez's claims. Again, here we're talking about Ramirez, the fellow student from Yale, whose story broke yesterday in the New Yorker. We never did read that account, but I'm sure you've read through it or gotten the gist of it by now. And it would probably be another triggering event for some of you to read through it. I guess for that reason, it's probably that, and time considerations, probably best that you read that article, if you want to read it, on your own time. We'll have to refer to it from time to time, I'm sure, and hopefully without setting anybody off or giving them any unpleasant memories. But I believe this episode, it's ongoing, and it's going to be triggering for people for a long time to come, I guess. All right, let's see. Other things being discussed this morning on this subject and others. Were there, let's see, there are more. Oh, here we are with a story in The Hill. Yale law professor who endorsed Kavanaugh says he's having second thoughts. But again, the only thing to do, according to Republicans. Remember this, again, come voting time. I don't need to remind you guys, but it's a line you can carry forward in any discussions you might have with people who, I guess, are still confused as to how to vote. This is what Republicans are seeing, and then insisting, regardless, that the vote needs to be accelerated. That's really rather remarkable all by itself. And as I was saying this morning, I can't think of a clearer illustration of the foolishness of the Republican insistence that the process now be accelerated and that the vote be held immediately. And then the story of Renata Dolphin saying, now that just days after having signed on a letter of support saying, yeah, this guy is fantastic, what a great nomination to the Supreme Court, now say, wait a minute, he did what? He said what? Oh my God, I've changed my mind. I don't support this guy anymore. 11 days from signing the letter to complete reversal after being reminded that this guy has been publicly insulting you for 35 years, Mr. Honorable Behavior, Mr. Respecter of Women. All of a sudden you find out in the space of 11 days that he's nothing that you thought he was. And the Republican response, let's vote now. Hurry, before another one comes out. Everybody knew all along that was the motivation for that. That and, of course, the upcoming elections. But they go hand in hand. It's pretty much the same issue. And it's just kind of amazing. And really also amazing. And just that, and I guess it's not coincidence, just the fact that she is on the letter is so amazing. And missed this whole reference to her. I don't know why she would be thumbing through their yearbook. I guess that's how it escaped her. But, I mean, just as a contemporary issue now, last night he goes on Fox News and insists once again that none of this is true, and he was tremendously respectful of women and a real mensch, except, of course, he was in a Catholic high school where I guess they don't say the word mensch a whole lot, but who knows? It is nearby a fairly sizable Jewish community in Bethesda. But this is pretty amazing that in print, a coordinated sexual harassment campaign of the very women who just went and signed a letter saying that he was always honorable and courteous with women, which, is despicable in its own right, but also, again, to restate the obvious, proof that no, he wasn't always honorable and courteous with women. Not then, and not even now, it turns out, because all of this is made up when he's angry with other people. What does he have to say about Renata? That I'd like to know. And I wonder if he'll be asked about that come Thursday. And as other people put it here, Susan Hennessy, Lawfare executive editor and a CNN national security and legal analyst, asking, is there anything more perfectly high school creep than the guy who lies about hooking up with a girl to impress his friends and then uses the lie to casually demean her behind her back? What an honorable behavior that is. And a good question. So, I don't know. It's pretty amazing that this has happened, and we'll see how this plays out over the next couple of days. Is there anything else I need to add on this one? Oh, yes. Well, of course, somebody else did point out Donald Trump and his rage tweeting. This is from yesterday evening, complaining the Democrats are working hard to destroy a wonderful man and a man who has the potential to be one of our greatest Supreme Court justices ever. Why? On what basis? No. With an array of capitalized false acquisitions. False acquisitions. The likes of which have never been seen before. He loves that phrase. The likes of which have never been seen before, except, of course, the likes of which were just seen a minute ago because he printed them 35 years ago. The likes of which he actually printed himself in his own yearbook entry about one of the women who signed a letter of support for him. But whatever. Loyalty. I love loyalty. That's one of his things. Loyalty is that's pretty nice. So Renata was loyal to him until she found out that he had never been loyal to her over the entirety of the nearly 4 decades that have passed since they knew one another in high school. Interesting. So it's a tough spot. We'll see whether or not he comes out of this one. We will see. And because other listeners and followers of the tweet stream today pointing out once again, it's always projection with these guys. Again, reiterating the part about his being so outraged about falsifying sexual encounters in order to embarrass or ruin someone else's reputation. No wonder he thinks everybody else is making it up. If he made it up about Renata, then everybody else must be making it up too. All right. Let's see. Any other things that we have to add to this part of the story? I don't know. There's other stories floating around about people who are withdrawing their endorsements. There was, of course, like I mentioned, the Yale law professor who had endorsed Kavanaugh, saying now he has second thoughts, and that wasn't anybody involved in dressing women up to go speak to him about clerkships either. It's a different person. One of the several insufferable op-eds, I think, that appeared in newspapers across the country from self-described liberal jurists or liberal lawyers who move in the appellate circuits saying, look, I don't always agree with him, but he's a man of integrity kind of thing. And God save us, I was saying, from these Ivy League, ivory tower contrarians who want us all to know what the liberal argument for Kavanaugh is going to be. A Yale Law School professor who initially endorsed Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court and testified his support for Kavanaugh during his confirmation hearing. He actually showed up at the hearing to make these statements. Now says he has, you'll never believe it, second thoughts about the nominee. I still stand by what I have said about Kavanaugh's uniquely impressive judicial and scholarly record over the last dozen years, and that seems surprising, to be quite honest, because I don't know that he has it. But this is the statement of Akil Reed Amar, now writing in the Yale Daily News on Monday. But Amar said the sexual assault allegation against Kavanaugh have made him question his support. And I should clarify, the sexual assault allegations, multiple, have made him question his support. Quote, but now that serious accusations have arisen about his conduct in his teenage years, I believe that these accusations deserve the best and most professional investigation possible, even if that means a brief additional delay on the ultimate vote on Judge Kavanaugh, and even if that investigatory delay imperils his confirmation, he added. Kavanaugh was thought to have an easy road to confirmation shortly after his hearing, but his confirmation has come under fire following the sexual assault allegations of two women being made public this month. Christine Blasey Ford, now a 51-year-old professor in California, went public with her allegation earlier this month. You know all about that one. The New Yorker reported Sunday that Senate Democrats were investigating a claim from Deborah, Ramirez, that Kavanaugh, well, again, we know what he did there and don't want to upset people any further. Both women have alleged that Kavanaugh was drunk in each incident. Michael Avenatti, there's also this guy hanging out there. Anyway, he says that he's representing a third woman with, as he puts it, credible information regarding Judge Kavanaugh. Well, I have credible information regarding Judge Kavanaugh too, but okay, I get your point. I don't really want to advertise the Avenatti claims any more than we have to at this point. And it's not necessarily that I don't think he'll deliver on it. It's just that he doesn't, well, at the very least, he doesn't need my help in promoting anything he's working on. We'll be getting to that all by itself. In the long run, this additional investigation, our professor here writes, is the best way forward, not just for the court and the country and Kavanaugh's accusers, but also for Kavanaugh himself. If the investigation's facts and findings support him, then he will join the court in the sunshine and not under a cloud. If instead the investigation uncovers compelling evidence against him, President Trump should be ready with a pre-announced backup nominee, Amar wrote. Kavanaugh has strongly denied the allegations of sexual misconduct on multiple occasions, most recently during a Fox News interview on Monday. So there you have it. And a reminder at the end of the story that both Ford and Kavanaugh are expected to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Thursday. Let's see. A couple other stories that I have opened up that have been tweeted through to me, some on different subjects, some on this one. Let's see. First, Daily Kos account itself tweeting out, I guess, one of the latest stories. I have to refresh the front page and make sure that we have the latest news here, and that we also preserve the tab on the one we read from Laura. But let's see. Trump wants Kavanaugh confirmation now, but McConnell doesn't have the votes, is the story on the front page. Is it on the front page now? I haven't really refreshed the front page, but Carrie Elleveld's story here, which I bet is, well, let's just refresh things so we can see. Joan's on top of the front page right now. But maybe, yeah, Carrie's story, I guess, was the one that ran previously. Let's just check in with that one because vote counting is important. Things got worse by the hour. Monday night for Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination, the Washington Post reported Donald Trump was coming unglued over the failure of Senate Republicans to push Kavanaugh's nomination through at his decree. Trump's growing impatience left Republican leader Mitch McConnell in the position of explaining how the Senate works and that he too is eager to hold a vote, but that he first needs to ensure that the nomination has the majority support to pass the Senate. In other words, McConnell clearly doesn't have the votes he needs, a fact made pointedly clear by Fox News Capitol Hill reporter Chad Pergram. Pergram's tweet is embedded in here. Kavanaugh nomination is in trouble. That's why McConnell made blistering speech today. Baseball teams mail it in once they are out of the pennant race. McConnell trying to get GOPers to run out every ground ball in an effort to salvage the nomination. Kavanaugh lacks the votes right now. An interesting take and interesting news at that. Politico found the same, reporting that a host of Republicans are now going cold on Kavanaugh and are almost uniformly saying, get back to me after Thursday, i.e. after the testimony of Kavanaugh accuser Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. And it's not just Senators Bob Corker, Susan Collins, Jeff Flake, and Lisa Murkowski. Their wavering is now being joined by Senators Shelley Moore Capito and Marco Rubio. Collins has additionally requested that the Judiciary panel hear from Kavanaugh's second accuser, Deborah Ramirez. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back now to the Daily Kos Radio's presentation of the Kagro in the Morning Show. I thought I would add a little different flourish to that one, even though, yes, we are also on Netroots Radio. I keep saying that one, too. I should mention, there is Daily Kos Radio now. And by the way, even more programs, I guess, technically under the Daily Kos Radio umbrella. The problem is I'm carrying the umbrella, I guess, and I don't see anybody here. But I do know, that there are other folks podcasting all on their own under the Daily Kos name with the official imprimatur of Daily Kos behind them. But since I work all the way here on the East Coast and they all the way on the West Coast, not much coordination between us, but I'm willing to hold the umbrella for them and remind you that I'm not the only one. And we'll try and get a couple more into the podcast, get them to catch the podcasting bug over the coming months and years. I think it's important to be able to hear from people this way, and it's nice to hear the voices behind some of the writing as well. Let's see. Where we left off here. Oh, yes. Actually, in the last couple paragraphs of this discussion of Carrie's piece here, at least some answer for the questions being posed quietly and in the background via email from our friend over in the UK, Gideon, and we probably have more friends over in the UK than we know of, but he's our most frequent correspondent, at any rate, from the UK. And from his perspective, he's having difficulty, as a lot of people are, and with good reason, really seeing a path all the way through to either the withdrawal or defeat of the Kavanaugh nomination. And admittedly, there's a lot of excitement about it in Democratic and progressive circles, and it is a possibility. But I think everybody would still say that even if they no longer regard it as the most likely outcome, they would not be shocked to see Kavanaugh confirmed after all of this, and even after the testimony on Thursday. However, as it remains a mystery to Gideon where this idea that the nomination could be in trouble at all really could actually come from. The answer is as unsatisfying as it is because, of course, reporters aren't always the greatest sources of insight on these things either, and they get the story wrong all the time. And in many instances, it could be argued that they have an interest in getting the story wrong. After all, it's a much more compelling read if people think the nomination is really on the bubble than if the truth is that Republicans are not swayed and never will be swayed. And there's a lot of evidence for the argument that they aren't swayed and don't get swayed, or at least aren't able to find a way clear to expressing having been swayed with votes. But again, here we are with the Fox News Capitol Hill reporter, and obviously Fox, I guess, would happily participate in a winking campaign about the danger that the nomination is in, knowing that it will make the gloating only that much sweeter after it's all said and done. But again, here we are with Fox News Capitol Hill reporter saying, look, the Kavanaugh nomination is in trouble. And we do have, it's objectively true that Republicans had planned to have the floor vote on Kavanaugh's confirmation already, and they have not been able to. And it is also objectively true that McConnell could bring the nomination to the floor immediately if he felt that complying with Trump's demands would be helpful in securing the nomination. It is clear that he does not. And it is clear from the fact that he does not believe the nomination is manageable at the moment. There's only one reason why that would be the case. And that would be that enough Republican senators are saying, I don't really know. I don't know that I would vote yes if you brought this to the floor immediately. I have to wait and see what happens on Thursday. That is, that's where this comes from. Politico finds the same, as Kerry puts it in the article we just read. Politico reports that a host of Republicans now going cold on Kavanaugh. Now, it's true that they list among them notorious wobblers like Susan Collins, whose whole shtick is, gee whiz, I don't know, I'm unsure. Okay, yes. As is Jeff Flakes. A little bit less so Bob Corker. Not that, he frequently says he's going to be a holdout and becomes a holdout. He just doesn't as frequently play this game. Susan Collins and Jeff Flake play it on everything. Murkowski does as well, but Murkowski, let's say, flirts with wobbling less than Collins does. Shelley Moore Capito and Marco Rubio are probably, again, loyal votes. Rubio has a reputation also of raising last-minute objections only to change his mind. Not so much on Capito, but that's a critical mass, and you have to respect it. And that's where, it may be that they reverse themselves in the end, but at least there's some explanation of where that's coming from. Let's see, where we left off. McConnell, being the perverse Senate ruler he has routinely proven to be, is now threatening to hold a vote as soon as early next week, quote, no matter what happens, unquote, in that hearing. But this thing ain't over yet. And then a mention of Stormy Daniels' lawyer, Michael Avenatti's involvement in this whole thing, plus an update mentioning, or not an update, but a late mention of the Renata alumni reference. Bottom line, things were not looking good for Kavanaugh coming out of Monday. But of course, again, true, this is the liberal, progressive, democratic view of all of this, and might not necessarily reflect reality on the ground inside the offices of each of these Senate Republicans. But it is the public view of the situation on the ground. All right. I might as well scroll through and look on the front page of Daily Kos through yesterday, because the other big story of yesterday is one that requires a bit of unraveling. As we were getting into the closing minutes of the show, literally the closing minutes of the show, a couple of you tweeted to me that this was happening as I spoke anyway, that we're talking about the resignation / firing / non-resignation / non-firing / totally routine meeting at the White House with Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. The word, while we were still on the air, but getting ready to exit and make way for Justice Putnam, was that Rosenstein had been fired or was resigning. First, there was the word that he was resigning from his position. Then, quickly afterward, the word that he was resigning in anticipation of being fired. And rather than hanging around to be fired, he was resigning instead, and that was why he was being summoned to the White House. And he didn't want to, he didn't want to stomach it. There was also speculation out there later on in the defense of this thing. I guess we should go through this chronologically if we can. Shortly after floating the idea that he was going to be fired, and so that's why Rosenstein was going to resign, there was immediate word that no, he hadn't yet resigned, and that he was perhaps only going to the White House for a routine meeting. But the New York Times and Axios were the ones who were like immediately out front with this news flash that he was resigning. Axios was the first one that I was sent yesterday, and they went with the, what was their formulation of it? Was exclusive. Rod Rosenstein is resigning. What do we decide the pronunciation of? It was now that I've said them both, I'm confused again. Rod Rosenstein? Dang. Now I forget. I had it for like several months. So that was their first formulation of the headline. The headline now reads that he offered to resign. Rod Rosenstein offered to resign. And I should take a look. Is there a big difference in the body text of all of this or not? Let's see. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has verbally, quote, offered to resign in discussions with White House Chief of Staff Kelly, according to a source close to Rosenstein. But as of now, it's unclear whether his resignation has been accepted. That's the current formulation of this. Yesterday it was that he had verbally resigned to Chief of Staff John Kelly in anticipation of being fired by President Trump, according to a source with direct knowledge. Per a second source with direct knowledge, he's expecting to be fired, so he plans to step down. So just another one of those situations you wonder whether the Axios reporters or perhaps later New York Times reporters are going to ever be motivated to treat their sources more skeptically. They seem to be getting burned left and right. So the current reporting anyway over in Axios also includes background. Rosenstein last year talked about invoking the 25th Amendment and wearing a wire. Remember this story from the New York Times? We didn't discuss it. It's one of the things we actually had to set aside in the flurry of Kavanaugh stories. But I'm sure you all heard by now that he made some comments, which this was a complicated part of the story too. Was he joking? Was he being sarcastic? It is alleged that he was. The New York Times reporters who broke the story continued to insist that he was serious and that there are real reasons to believe that it wasn't a joke. I don't actually get that. So I am not sure why they continue to believe this, but they do. And for a brief period over the weekend, it appeared like, this story, as reported by the New York Times, was almost certain to make Donald Trump furious enough that he would attempt to fire him again. And just as he always is, he's so great at getting things done because he's a dotard. He can't make it happen. And I suppose certain parties would characterize this as the resistance inside the White House, apparently reminding him of the bureaucratic difficulties of doing this, plus the political costs of firing him at that point, and able to talk him out of it. So as I understand it, and I'm still not up to date, and that's why I've been sort of scanning the Daily Kos front page for their write-up on it. He thinks he's going to be fired. He offers to resign, and then no one was sure whether he had really offered to resign or not. And then by the end of the morning yesterday, right around noontime, the story seemed to morph into, no, he's not being asked or forced to resign, but he may resign anyway. And then lots of speculation about what would that mean in terms of finding a replacement, and does Trump have the power to name his replacement, or does he not? And who is the likely replacement? And is that person qualified to handle the Russia investigation, or would he be biased? The answer, of course, is he would be biased, and so therefore he probably will try to handle the investigation. All sorts of craziness happening yesterday, but the upshot of it at least is that Rosenstein continues in his job this morning, and at least for the time being. It's been very, very strange, to say the least, about it. Let's see. So I'm continuing to scroll to see if there are any attempts at explaining the timeline of this rather stupid story, but nothing making itself immediately apparent. But there are so many things to cover and so many angles from which it's being covered. It's not easy to know how far back I'm going to have to scroll in order to get this. Let's see. Laura Clausen also writing on this subject yesterday. By yesterday evening, Kavanaugh is a disaster, so Trump might, ellipsis, fire his deputy attorney general as a distraction. That was another theory that got floated by the afternoon yesterday, that this had all been Trump's idea of a distraction from the Kavanaugh story, which is amazing because it's such a terrible idea as a distraction, because it itself raises the possibility of impeachable offenses. It's not good to distract from another guy's impeachable offense by saying, hey, everybody, look over here, I'm impeachable too. But that seems to be his strategy because he's a moron. The morning's back and forth over whether Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein had been fired, and helpfully, thank God, Laura is such an experienced hand at this. She knows that she knows it's not for me, but she knows that people will need a link to prove that there was a back and forth. That's the way good bloggers do things, and she's included one, which is the Daily Kos write-up of that back and forth that I've been after in all this. The morning's back and forth on whether he's been fired, had resigned, or was still in his job. The answer appears to be C, for now, still in his job, may have been an effort to distract from the ongoing Brett Kavanaugh disaster, Vanity Fair's Gabriel Sherman reports. And if that was the case, it's working great, because I only spent the first hour and 15 minutes on Kavanaugh today instead of the full 2 hours. You see? So here's from the Vanity Fair article. According to a source briefed on Trump's thinking, it's a very quick briefing, Trump decided that firing Rosenstein would knock Kavanaugh out of the news, potentially saving his nomination and Republicans' chances of keeping the Senate, which is amazing because, well, who knows? With these Republicans, you can't tell. Gideon might be right. You know, they would just be emboldened to seat Kavanaugh by Trump's firing of Rosenstein, even though they have been saying for months that that was some sort of red line, that if Trump crossed it, they would consider impeachment, or they would consider it obstruction of justice, or they don't know what they'd do. By golly, they would clutch at their pearls. There would be something here. And of course, like I said, Gideon may be right. The best bet may be, no, there won't be. There's nothing, and there never will be. Always a possibility. We're always guessing at these things. So, According to a source briefed on Trump's quote-unquote thinking, I guess I should say, Trump decided firing him, Rosenstein, would knock Kavanaugh out of the news, potentially saving his nomination, probably doing the opposite. The strategy was to try and do something really big, the source said. The leak about Rosenstein's resignation could have been the result, and it certainly had the desired effect of driving Kavanaugh out of the news for a few hours. It really didn't, by the way. But it's an interesting thought. And by the way, even more speculation. This set off another round of speculation that the original New York Times story that sparked this latest round of outrage from Trump, that is that Rosenstein had at some point discussed wearing a wire or recording his conversations with Trump or invoking the 25th Amendment. There's some speculation now that the sources for that New York Times story may have been part of this strategy, that we will leak to the New York Times that this stuff happened so that they will produce a story that will outrage Trump so that he will use that excuse to then fire Rosenstein and bump Kavanaugh off the front page. On the other hand, just to show how unlikely that much thinking is for Trump, there is also a conspiracy theory, I think, being circulated by the likes of Sean Hannity and others, that the leak to the New York Times was similarly false, or at least synthetic, let's say, and was leaked by liberals to the New York Times in the hopes of baiting Trump into rage tweeting a firing of Rosenstein and then sealing the deal with respect to, I guess, obstruction of justice charges and maybe starting impeachment proceedings as well. So nobody knows what this thing was, except that there are still people who are saying that at the very least it was Trump's thinking that it would knock Kavanaugh out of the news cycle. It really didn't. And so because it was so ineffective, I have an easier time believing that it was a Trump strategy than I used to, but I'm still not convinced. Well, Laura goes on to say, of course, this is very stupid, but also sounds like something Donald Trump would absolutely believe for at least 10 to 15 minutes at a time. I think we're right on the same page there, Laura. The thing is, as long as Kavanaugh is a nominee for the Supreme Court and is the subject of sexual assault allegations, he will remain in the headlines. Even the constitutional crisis of Trump firing someone who stands between himself and the Mueller investigation will only do so much to distract from Kavanaugh. And since Kavanaugh appears to have been selected in part to protect Trump from investigation, the two stories dovetail in a way that might not create the exact distraction Trump would be looking for. Firing or pretending to fire Rosenstein to create a distraction is a sign that Trump is feeling the pressure on Kavanaugh. Sherman reports that some Trump allies are urging him to ditch Kavanaugh for an easier to confirm nominee like Amy Coney Barrett, a woman. And that Trump has been privately trashing Kavanaugh and the Republican establishment, he says, pushed Kavanaugh on him. Like Roy Moore. Very weird. How odd that should happen twice. And that the two nominations or the two endorsements that he was pushed unwillingly into making are both credibly accused of sexual assault. Weird. You wouldn't think he would need so much convincing. All right. Let's see. Which one's next here? Okay, we got that one. Oh, so Laura had referred to the back and forth story. Mark Sumner wrote that one up. Rod Rosenstein reported to have, quote, verbally resigned. And this is the story that came across on the front page yesterday at 10:43 that everybody was tweeting about. And are we updated in all this or not? Well, I guess it has some of the back and forth included in the form of tweets. Axios, Mark started out with, is reporting that Rod Rosenstein had verbally resigned to John Kelly because Trump was about to fire him. And again, per the sources with, quote, direct knowledge, they had that on good authority. See, if true, it isn't. This immediately imperils continuation of the special counsel investigation. Shortly after that, Erica Orden, says a source close to Rosenstein disputes the Axios report that Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein verbally resigned. Let's see. Laura Jarrett reports the source that says Rosenstein expects he is being fired. Noel Francisco, you would have seen that name yesterday. That's the Solicitor General, and he would take on oversight of the Mueller probe. It was expected, at least according to Erica, and I'm not certain that other people agreed, if Rosenstein were fired. Let's see. We've got Dawn Thorne, then later tweeting, MSNBC is saying Rosenstein will not resign. So if they want him gone, they're going to have to fire him. He's resisting, thank God. Then another tweet embedded here from Adam Blickstein. I wonder if the White House leaked out Rosenstein resigned so that they could get around the Vacancy Act. If Rosenstein is fired, he can't be replaced by the Vacancy Act, and that caused a lot of analysis and back and forth too. NBC's Pete Williams, gold standard in DOJ reporting, according to Jeremy Pelofsky here, says Rosenstein en route to the White House won't resign and will force them to fire him. As I am told, Vacancies Act only kicks in if he resigns. So what's that all about? Well, I think we tucked away Think Progress's first crack at that, Ian Millhiser, picking up on that story and rushing to the door to print this one out. Noel Francisco, let's find out about this guy. This is the man who will supervise Mueller if Trump fires Rosenstein. And there's an interesting quote in here. We'll just save it for the body of the story. Even before he became Donald Trump's top Supreme Court advocate, Solicitor General Noel Francisco was a magnet for Trumpian causes. Francisco was one of the tobacco industry's top appellate advocates, and he represented the coal company at the heart of a deadly mining disaster, a coal company owned, of course, by Trump's Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. So I guess we're talking about the Sago mine there. In the Supreme Court, Francisco convinced the justices to effectively strip President Obama of the recess appointments power. He represented religious conservatives attacking the Obama administration's efforts to expand access to birth control, and he persuaded the court to legalize many forms of political bribery. In short, Francisco built his law practice as if his primary goal was to troll the libs. Flash forward a few years, and Francisco is now one of the most powerful and influential lawyers in the country. As Solicitor General, Francisco shapes the Trump administration's appellate litigation strategy and acts as one of the top advisors to the justices themselves. And as one of the Justice Department's top officials, Francisco is next in line to supervise Special Counsel Robert Mueller if Trump fires Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Francisco's record suggests that if given the power to rein in his threat to Trump's presidency, what is his threat to Trump's presidency? This threat to Trump's presidency, he would do so enthusiastically. As Solicitor General, Francisco helped transform his office from its traditional role as the American people's advocate before the Supreme Court into a litigation chop shop, advancing Republican causes. In the lead up to the 2016 election, Francisco co-authored an op-ed touting the Trumpian claim that the FBI had treated Hillary Clinton with kid gloves when it investigated her IT practices and ultimately determined that no charges were warranted. At a 2016 conference hosted by the Federalist Society, you remember them, the conservative legal group that Trump relies upon to pick many of his judicial nominees. We never did finish that story on the air yesterday. Francisco offered a vision of the Second Amendment that was straight out of the NRA's paranoid fantasy about armed citizens shooting back at their government. He also began his remarks with a declaration of loyalty, quote, "I always say yes to the Federalist Society." The Solicitor General, Ian continues, is a uniquely influential lawyer, so much so that Solicitors General are often described as the 10th Justice because of their profound impact on the Supreme Court's conduct. If any are in any given term, the Solicitor General is likely to file a brief in the majority of argued cases heard before the court. The Solicitor General's office participated in 58 of the 72 decided cases in 2014, either as party or as an amicus. Historically, I've got to get our music started here. Historically, the court backs the Solicitor General's preferred outcome in 60 to 80% of cases in which the United States expresses a view. The court, moreover, routinely seeks the Solicitor General's advice on whether it should hear a particular case. Indeed, this practice is so common that Supreme Court practitioners refer to it by an acronym, a CVSG, which stands for Call for the Views of the Solicitor General. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. I'm going to go back to the old formulation on that one, just so it's not a distraction. And let's continue on with Ian Millhiser's look at Noel Francisco and how he may come to play an important role in the Mueller investigation, what kind of person he is. We were just talking about how influential the Solicitor General's advice is in how the Supreme Court operates, including the fact that there is a special acronym, CVSG, on these cases, which stands for Call for the Views of the Solicitor General. They solicit his advice all the time. He's the solicitor, and they keep soliciting him. Yet all of this influence, he says, comes at a price, or at least it has in the past. The Solicitor General is the ultimate repeat player in Supreme Court litigation. He's the custodian of more than a century of credibility, or at least was before this guy, that past office holders earned by placing the institutional interests of the court and the legal system and the United States itself before those of any particular administration. As former Solicitor General Drew Days once said of the office, the nation's top litigator's responsibility is ultimately not to any particular agency or person in the federal government, but rather the interests of the United States, which may, on occasion, conflict with the short-term programmatic goals of an affected governmental entity. At times, this insistence that the long-term interests of the United States must triumph over short-term political goals proves immensely frustrating to an administration's allies. The Justice Department, for example, is exceedingly reluctant to concede that speculative limits exist on Congress's power. And for good reason. If DOJ concedes today that some hypothetical future law would be unconstitutional, Congress may someday pass a similar law, and the Justice Department's concession could be used against it in federal court. During the 2012 litigation seeking to repeal the Affordable Care Act, former Solicitor General Paul Clement exploited this institutional constraint to great effect. Clement argued, falsely, that if the Supreme Court upheld Obamacare, then there would no longer be any limits on the federal government's power to legislate. That led Justice Anthony Kennedy to ask a fairly obvious question of then Solicitor General Donald Verrilli. Could Verrilli identify for us some limits on the federal government's power to regulate commerce? Verrilli's answer was halting and imprecise, when he could have delivered a crisp list of hypothetical laws that are unconstitutional under the Obama administration's legal theory. At the time, it looked like Verrilli might have given away the case and sacrificed Obamacare along with it. But it's also easy to guess why Verrilli did so. His job was to represent the institutional concerns of the United States. even when those institutional concerns weighed against the signature legislative accomplishment of the President of the United States. In that moment, Verrilli placed the perpetual interests of the United States government before the short-term need to win this particular case. Many observers criticized him for how he handled this argument. I am one of them, Millhiser said, but in his response to Justice Kennedy, Verrilli acted in the grand tradition of solicitors general who act as custodians of a grander institution, not as partisans. Now compare Verrilli's conduct to the way Francisco handled a case brought by anti-union activists seeking to defund public sector unions. For fairly obvious reasons, government employees have weaker First Amendment free speech protections within the context of their job. A public school principal can order a math teacher to actually teach math and not, say, 16th century Asian art, even though a private citizen could not be compelled to speak on a certain subject against their will. If the government didn't have some power to control the speech of its own workers, it would be impossible for it to manage a workplace. But what happens when a government worker expresses a political view that their boss disagrees with, or blows the whistle on a supervisor who is spending public funds irresponsibly? The Supreme Court started to explore this question in Pickering v. Board of Education. Pickering is a half-century-old case, and subsequent decisions have complicated the rules governing public sector workers considerably, but the general rule that emerges from the Pickering line of cases is that a government worker asserting a First Amendment claim against their employer must first show that they spoke on a matter of legitimate public concern. If the employee can clear this bar, the case then moves on to its second step, where a court asks whether the relevant government entity had an adequate jurisdiction for treating the employee differently. Not jurisdiction, but justification. Whether the relevant government entity had an adequate justification for treating the employee differently from any other member of the general public. But if the employee cannot clear this bar, they've lost their case, which brings us to Janus v. AFSCME, the anti-union case. AFSCME is the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. The thrust of the plaintiff's argument in Janus is that all collective bargaining between a government employer and a union is a matter of public concern, a claim that, if accepted by the court, could lead to many unions losing a major source of funding that they need to operate. Arguing before the Supreme Court, ostensibly on behalf of the United States government, Francisco embraced this anti-union theory and agreed that all speech relating to employment conditions about pay, about vacation, about all of the various employee benefits provided to government workers are a matter of public concern. That led to a rather awkward exchange with Justice Elena Kagan, herself a former Solicitor General, who noted that Francisco's expansive definition of what constitutes a matter of public concern was a very unusual position for the government to be taking. If the court were to agree with Francisco's position, that would mean that the United States would have to litigate all future employee-employer disputes under the second step of Pickering rather than under the first. Francisco, in other words, effectively argued that more federal employees should be able to drag the federal government into court and force the government into a protracted trial over whether the way it managed a particular employee was justified. Moreover, Francisco took this position despite the fact that he was appearing in court on behalf of the United States government. Unlike Verrilli, who avoided arguments that would advance the political interests of his party at the expense of the institutional interests of the United States, Francisco decided that it was more important to undermine unions, a frequent antagonist of the Republican Party, than it was to protect his own client's interest in avoiding future lawsuits. A few minutes after Francisco's exchange with Kagan, there was an even more awkward exchange with Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Francisco's arguments in Janus did not merely run counter to the interests of his client. It was also at odds with the argument Verrilli presented to the Supreme Court when the exact same issue was before the court in 2016. That case, Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association, split the court 4-4 after Justice Antonin Scalia's death. And, as it turns out, Janus isn't the only case where Francisco has abandoned a long-held view in favor of one that happened to align with the Republican Party's immediate interests. How many times this term already, Sotomayor asked Francisco during the Janus argument, have you flipped positions from prior administrations? According to Georgetown law professor Marty Lederman, the answer to Sotomayor's question is at least a dozen times. Lederman counted 12 distinct issues where the Justice Department flipped its view in an appeal after Donald Trump started filling the department's top jobs, more than half of which took place in briefing before the Supreme Court. That's a simply astounding number when you consider that the court only heard arguments in 63 cases this term. The cases Lederman identifies include an effort to purge voters from Ohio's voter rolls. Francisco's office, no surprise, is for it, and an effort to protect transgender students from discrimination. DOJ is against this effort. They involve voter suppression laws, which DOJ is now for, workers' rights to bring class action lawsuits against their employers, which DOJ is now against, and the right of LGBTQ Americans to be free from discrimination, which DOJ now is on the side of the pro-discrimination folks. Now, he says, in fairness, at least some of these cases are not yet before the Supreme Court, though under the Justice Department's rules, all appeals to the lower appellate courts in cases handled by divisions of the Department and United States attorneys, and all petitions for certiorari and direct appeals to the Supreme Court must be authorized by the Solicitor General. Similarly, some of the briefs in these cases were filed during a brief interregnum when Francisco's deputy Jeff Wall ran the office of the Solicitor General. A federal law prevented Francisco from serving as acting head of the office, while he was also awaiting confirmation to lead it on a permanent basis. But Francisco served as a, quote, senior advisor within the Justice Department while Wall was acting Solicitor General, and it is likely that Francisco was consulted on matters that he would be in charge of after his confirmation. In any event, since Trump took office, the office of the Solicitor General has rapidly transformed itself into a strong advocate for conservative legal causes, and Francisco appears to be an enthusiastic champion of this transformation. So much so that he's even willing to advocate against the long-term interests of his only client, us, in order to advance conservative goals. Meanwhile, an unstable and increasingly angry president occupies the White House. Trump reportedly views Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein as a threat because the president feels that Rosenstein has not done enough to hinder Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into his campaign's ties to Russia. If Trump fires Rosenstein, the job of supervising Mueller will fall to Francisco. Everything in Francisco's record suggests that he's a passionate conservative, eager to use his office to advance ideological causes. Someday very soon, Trump may hand Francisco the power to shut down Mueller's investigation. Important background. Wow. Well, okay, there's other important background that we probably should add to things. Luckily, it's only Tuesday, and plenty of time to do this during the rest of the week, if not today's show. Let me take a pause for myself and decide which ones we can fit into the show by leaning instead on our good friend Paula Ryder, Paula Apanese, to those of you who may know her in real life. Paula Ryder, to the rest of us who follow her on Twitter, and she has been she has read for us an entry by Dahlia Lithwick. I have to go and grab her link to the actual article here so that I can read the intro correctly here. And let me make sure I've got it here. Does she have yeah, here we are. Open it up. It is Dahlia Lithwick's entry in Slate from, the 17th of this month. Christine Blasey Ford's timing. It's all about the timing, right? Well, the timings, they say on the Republican side, it's suspect. It's 11th hour accusation. Well, Dahlia Lithwick does a great job of clearing up why it's not suspect, and Paula does a great job of delivering it. Take it away.
Why do women wait until the last possible second to speak out about sexual harassment and assault claims? This is exactly the line of questioning Senate Republicans used to smear Anita Hill back when she testified against Clarence Thomas. Why didn't she lodge the complaints until he was poised to sit on the highest court of the land, given that he had previously been appointed to prestigious positions? It's a funny question. It's actually related to the question I asked last week, which was, why do women come forward with these claims at all? And there's a link to that. The prevailing Republican argument seems to be that if a woman was truly the victim of a violent act of sexual aggression, she ought to have reported it at the very instant it happened. So the decision to wait to report it on the eve of a Senate Judiciary Committee vote clearly represents craven, dirty tricks. Here's one problem with that analysis. It's only the 11th hour because Chuck Grassley and Mitch McConnell have decided this hearing needs to happen at light speed. Indeed, the pacing apparently necessitated withholding the vast majority of the nominees' records from the National Archives, which they argued was fine because the documents were being vetted by a friend of the nominees. In fact, the same need for lightning speed required that Kavanaugh be rushed through the process so quickly that it necessitated tens of thousands of pages of documents to be sent to the full committee the night before confirmation hearings began. The definition of power must include the power to set the timetable in which facts are discernible, and Senate Republicans, who held a Supreme Court seat open for almost a year, are now unwilling to hold one open for 3 months. The reason the 11th hour wasn't, say, the 3rd hour is entirely because the timetable has been set by those who wanted to short-circuit meaningful scrutiny. So the complaint that it's too late in the process is hard to swallow. That's one reason why complaints about Ford's timing ring hollow. But there is a deeper reason why women don't publicly report their assaults until the last possible instant, and until they absolutely have to. Women who are victims start the clock at the moment of their trauma. Men who are perpetrators started at the moment they are caught. The entire history of women complaining about sexual assault has been recorded on men's time. In case you're interested, here's what it looks like from a woman's perspective. They are attacked. They wait. They persuade themselves they deserved it or asked for it. They try to shift along. They tell a partner or they tell a spouse. They tell a therapist. They tell their parents and maybe their friends. They must weigh at every step the likelihood of being dismissed, as Ford is now being dismissed, as a liar and a hysteric. This is a trauma that they may carry around for years, burying it and excavating it and hiding it again. They debate speaking up. They realize what happens when they speak up by watching what happens when other women speak up. They make little deals with themselves in which they promise that if the man is ever poised to do real harm to others, they will surely speak up. Why don't women come forward on the very day it happens? Because they have friends and hopes and dreams and confusion and alcohol and hope in every Hollywood movie ever. Because, for a very long time, it is not worth the cost. In Ford's case, the decision to come forward on the record in September was not an active choice, but instead the result of a position that she was forced into after her anonymous account was made public against her will. Consider Ford's explanation to the Post. Quote, as the story snowballed, Ford said that she heard people repeating inaccuracies about her, and with the visits from reporters, felt her privacy being chipped away. Her calculation changed. These are all the ills that I was trying to avoid, she said, explaining her decision to come forward. Now I feel like my civic responsibility is outweighing my anguish and terror about retaliation. End quote. It's also important to be very specific about what is actually coming out now in this so-called 11th hour, because the allegation is not new. It is simply new to us. Ford sent a letter detailing her story to her congresswoman in late July. The Post story notes that she also sent a tip to the paper itself in early July. Quote, though Ford had contacted the Post, she declined to speak on the record for weeks as she grappled with concerns about what going public would mean for her and her family, and what she said was her duty as a citizen to tell the story, end quote. This woman has been grappling with her story and whether and how she should tell it for months and for years. For her, this event started when she was 15 and unspooled over years of revelation, medical help, and ambivalence from those in power. For the men who commit these acts, the clock starts never. Consider Brett Kavanaugh's statement on the matter, released Monday morning. Quote, this is a completely false allegation. I have never done anything like what the accuser describes to her or anyone. Because this never happened, I had no idea who was making the accusation until she identified herself yesterday. End quote. For most of their lives, what they may have done never even occurs to them. They were drunk, or they forgot, or they were alone, or they were in a group. And people will cover and apologize and excuse them. People will say 35 years ago, he was a child. And they will forget that 35 years ago, she was also a child, except that she has lugged this around on her back for decades and only got brave enough to tell anyone 6 years ago. Most of the women I know spent Sunday afternoon recalling a time a man grabbed her at a party and covered her mouth and rubbed it against her. It happens so damn often that we all have the same story. But we didn't report it in real time because that's just what it is, and boys will be boys. And also we will soon learn that if we come to report it in men's time, we will be told we were too late. We are always too late. Because if we were really worried about these types of transgressions, we would have had the wherewithal to stop them before they happened. Once you have become a victim, you are already too late. For victims, the time splits open on the day of the assault. For the accused, time splits open on the day they are named. And yet again, as was the case for Anita Hill, the power to decide when something is too late to matter is apparently in the hands of the same people who have the power to set the timetable, and those people do not seem to have a good understanding of trauma. Let me say yet again, I have no idea what happened to Ford in the 1980s and what part Kavanaugh may have played, but I am inclined to believe that if she reported it in 2012 to a therapist, it cannot be said she made it up just yesterday or even last July. That women report assault by powerful men at all remains difficult to comprehend, and attacks on Ford that began before she was even named show why. That women who eventually do report such assaults do not do so in a time frame that is convenient for powerful men says far more about who sets the schedule than about who is telling the truth. This is Paula from PaulaWriter.com.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you for the entry. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we got that in there before things progress too much further on the Kavanaugh front. And, wow, what a difficult morning it's been so far with just what's going on in my throat alone. 7-minute break, and I still couldn't get rid of this damn thing. All right. Let's see, where to go for the rest of the show. There's only a few minutes left. I did want to cram in more about the Federalist Society, but I thought I'd also make mention of a couple of quick things that caught my eye while scanning the Twitter machine. First one, just wanted to put on the record the story of Ted Cruz being booed out of a D.C. restaurant. Is the latest to get chased out of a public place. And, of course, more moaning and groaning this time from Ari Fleischer that, oh my goodness, Washington has become a sick town now that he's done with it, I guess. I lived in D.C. for 21 years. There were many contested emotional battles, but this is awful. Washington has become a sick town, forcing people you don't like out of restaurants, especially when they're with their spouse, doesn't solve any problems. It makes everything worse. Great observation here from Mehdi Hassan. Who is Mehdi Hassan? He's a columnist with The Intercept. And he points out, gee, how short our memories are. Cruz and his wife were heckled and booed by the GOP cultists at the Republican convention and had to be escorted out of the hall by security after Cruz refused to endorse cult leader Donald. Is that so? I can't recall all of that, but I guess that I'll credit it with being true and makes for an interesting argument. Now that we know this, all right, pretty amazing. Let's see. I guess Donald's over at the UN now. And what's this? The report of Aaron Rupar laughing aloud at what's going on there. And let's see, I've got to have my volume turned down because that's going to autoplay here. The UN audience laughs at Trump after he claims, quote, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. Sounds pretty awesome. I would love to hear the actual laughter on that. Can we turn that up? It's going to be on the wrong computer here, but let's see if we can hear it. No, we're not going to be able to hear it all that easily. I got an idea how we can get that in there. We can pocket it and then go over to the correct computer and open it up. I'd just love to hear that laughter if we can get it. Although, is this taking too long to pocket the damn thing? There we go. Let's refresh that. Go on over. See if we can get that. I'm kind of curious. How long is this clip? 1 minute and 11 seconds. All right. Well, what the hell? We'll throw that out. We'll throw the Federalist Society
Madam
update
President.
out for the moment and see if we can enjoy this here. All right. Here he is addressing the UN. We knew this was coming.
Mr. Secretary General, world leaders, ambassadors, and distinguished delegates, 1 year ago I stood before you for the first time in this grand hall.
He doesn't like the grand hall, of course. He doesn't like the marble that's behind him. Remember, he's criticized that before. He's such a decorator, this Donald is.
I addressed the threats facing our world, and I presented a vision to achieve a brighter future for all of humanity. Today I stand before the United Nations General Assembly to share the extraordinary progress we've made. In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
Not bad. I mean, he could have been furious and gone thundering in the response, but pretty subdued laughter too at that. But very funny, amazing, good for you. There's no reason for you guys to stand for this nonsense. You're not a captive audience the way the rest of us are. All right, and I might as well use this other opportunity for this quick update. Our Montreal girl, B.J. Hutch, sends us this one from the CBC News. Remember our discussion the other day about the migrant crisis or what Donald Trump thought was a migrant crisis anyway, in Spain, and his suggestion that they build a wall across the Sahara Desert. As it turns out, they've been looking into the situation there in those two tiny enclaves of Spanish territory in the northern Sahara. And there is, in fact, a fence around Melilla, the tiny Spanish enclave on the north coast of Africa. And it's reported here, yet to dissuade migrants from seeking out a backdoor into Europe. So I guess it's not working all that well. Walls work, they love to say. Fences don't. They would just criticize this one because it's a fence. And obviously, we told you that fences weren't going to work. You have to turn a fence into a wall. That would be their response. But there we go. Spain built fences 20 years ago to keep migrants away. Here's how that worked out. I guess it didn't. But long before wall building became a showpiece election promise in the U.S., fences went up on Europe's southern border to keep migrants out. That effectively turned Melilla, M-E-L-I-L-L-A, a tiny Spanish enclave on the north coast of Africa, I'd like to learn more about that one, into a gated community. The fence is monitored 24/7 with infrared cameras, motion sensors, and watchtowers that make it possible to respond to a breach within a minute. Moroccan authorities, supported by EU money, also help keep migrants away. But 20 years and millions of euros later, that fence has yet to dissuade migrants from coming or to remove Melilla from the modern-day map of possible backdoors into Europe. As the migrants' sea route to Europe shifted from Italy to Spain this year, Melilla and Ceuta, another autonomous Spanish city on the Moroccan coast, have seen an increase in the number of asylum seekers and migrants arriving within their borders too. There's also a real concern that those numbers will grow. The tiny port of Melilla has long been a coveted gateway to Europe, and its fence, built in 1998, predates Donald Trump's recent suggestions that Spain should build a wall across the Sahara. But now there are Syrians and increasingly Yemenis among those looking for a way in. They join the continuing inflow of North and Sub-Saharan African migrants. A long way to go from Syria and Yemen to get all the way over there. They get around the fences by paying smugglers to put them on rafts or sneak them through official border crossings, often stashed in the nooks and crannies of ordinary vehicles. So not exactly foreign to the way things are done here on our own southern border. Let's see. We got to get this to close. And come on, where are you? We got to get ready for our musical interlude to play our way out of this one. Anyway, sounds like they get through in much the same way. Here's a picture of the fence, and it's a double fence, maybe a triple fence. A fence chain link on either side and another fence in the middle and all sorts of barbed wire and whatnot, and it looks pretty imposing, and I guess it's just not doing the job. No surprise to anyone who has seen what's gone on here in the United States. Oh, interesting. So Melilla is not at the closest approach to Spain, as Ceuta is directly across from Gibraltar. But it's a little further east in the Mediterranean, but looks like a pretty decent stretch between Melilla across the Mediterranean to Spain, but a good port city to set off from nonetheless, and I guess one of the only Spanish outposts there. You take what you can get, I suppose, when you're in migrant mode. All right, we'll be back Wednesday tomorrow with Greg Dworkin and with Joan McCarter, and we'll see what we can squeeze in. I want to get back to that Federalist Society story. In the meantime, plenty more stories coming from Justice Putnam on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. What do we got? Starting off in the Bistro Cafe, Ronan Farrow, big name these days, lays out the fairly high level of evidence that they used to cover their blockbuster report, the other person in that being Jane Meyer, in their report. On the rest of the menu, the Trump administration guts the Obama-era rule that have made trains safer. A vulnerable GOP congressman uses fake data to demand family separation. Ooh, that's back in the news again. And convicted Trump foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos now says he's uncovered a massive plot against him.
On netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
It's a good thing all these plots are so massive. It would be difficult to discover them otherwise. But he's uncovered yet another one, so look forward to hearing more about what he's discovered if he's a credible source. But we know Justice is. He'll bring you all those stories and more next right here on Netroots Radio. We'll see you tomorrow.